Good evening and welcome to League of Women Voters Presents. I'm Jim Robertson, your moderator. You know, for about a century, since the advent of radio, since it started crackling across the airwaves, people have been predicting the demise of newspapers. And that continued up through television, and now in the age of internet. Bill Gates said that newspapers would be dead in 20 years, and that was in 1987. I'm here to tell you that newspapers are alive and well in Columbia and in hundreds of towns across the country. The landscape has changed, though, and as our guest tonight will tell you, we've had to learn new ways to navigate our way through the business and into the future. And the future is where these guys have one foot. My guests are Andy Waters. He's the president and general manager of the Tribune, my employer, and Randy Picht, who is the executive director of the Reynolds Journalism Institute, not related to the Reynolds Alumni Center. And
Not too
they
far
are over at the institute. They're looking at new ways to present journalism and new business models. Andy, I know you've had the same experience I have when we're out around town and run into acquaintances or friends, or we meet people, they find out we're in newspapers, and they say, "Oh, how are you doing?" You know, like you've just lost your best friend or something. What do you say to them?
Well, I tell them, that a lot of what they've heard about the newspaper industry is only halfway true, really. When you're talking about newspapers, you really have to clarify whether you're talking about big city metros or you're talking about smaller town newspapers, because there's a big divide between the two. They're unlike, the business is entirely different whether you're talking about a large metropolitan area or a small community like ours. And frankly, a lot of large newspapers have gotten themselves into trouble, and it has happened within the past 5 years. And there's some real struggles happening in big metro areas.
What are the differences?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the nature of the market they're trying to cover. If you're in a giant metropolitan area in your newspaper, it's really tough to cover the local community. Which one do you pick? There's several suburbs that make up a metro area, and a lot of times the metro paper is focused on maybe the city, area where the city government is. That's not necessarily where everybody lives. So the people who live there and read the paper don't necessarily have that connection with local news like we have in a community like ours, where when we're covering the community, it's the small town where everybody lives and cares about, and as a result, a lot of these larger papers have historically focused on national, international news, state news to a large extent. The national and international news has really become a commodity. There's a lot of places now where you can get that news, so that has become less of a reason to read the newspaper. And as a consequence, and the large papers never have really done a great job of covering local news. So, there's a readership issue there.
So that's a fundamental change in the market with the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
the internet's brought about this.
What kind of things? I mean, you came on. I mean, we've worked together for many years, but you started really getting deep into the ownership and management of the newspaper about the time that this thing blew up. What have you? What's the difference between when you started the Tribune and today?
Big difference is the way a lot of people are reading us is now online. It's not the way most people are reading us, and that's another thing that's sometimes surprising for a lot of people to learn when they ask me, how the newspaper's doing. They assume and they tell me, most people are reading online, right? Nobody's really reading the print edition anymore, are they? Well, I have to tell them. In fact, most people read the print edition, and a few people in our local community prefer to read us online, but most people like us in print. So, some of the assumptions that people bring into this conversation, have to be clarified and corrected. Big difference though is that there are a lot of options out there for where to get news, and we have to be involved in that, and we are. That's one of the things that I was involved in when this transition took place that you described. We've had a website for 14 years or
Right.
12, whatever it is. Back when we got started, I remember sitting around a table. You were probably there too, trying to figure out, what were we going to make the internet? Where is this going to go?
Yep.
What are we going to do with this new media? And we didn't really know the answer to that, but we figured that we better have a website and put our news out there, because one of these days somebody's going to figure it out, and we need to be there. Well, we still haven't figured it out, and it's 15 years later, but we're a lot better at understanding the nature of that medium than we were before.
Right.
And we're there. We're we're taking advantage of the medium, but fortunately, print is still strong, and it's a big part of our business, and it's not going away anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
Randy Pick, you had a career at Associated Press. Before that, you worked in newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've had a look at the industry from several different angles, and now you're kind of the think tank angle. What do you see? How do you see journalism on the 10,000 foot level changing? And does your group, which includes fellows that are doing research, they looking at papers like the Tribune and that size papers? Are they looking at the big papers? Are they looking at newspapers at all? So what's going on over at Reynolds?
Well, I think a couple things that Andy kind of touched on in terms of journalism. One of the issues is that for so long, we just went along, and advertising paid the bills, and the reporters wrote what they thought they covered, and the editors covered and wrote about what the community needed, and everybody was happy. And now, as all these multiple forms of information are available, and people are only interested in certain kinds of niches, we're asking more questions about, well, what role should we have? What should we be doing? And some of the broadest issues have to do with the fact that the audience is in control of when they want to watch, where they want to get their information, how they want to get it, how they want to, interact with the newsrooms and newspapers and TV stations. And another thing that I think journalism is wrestling with is how to engage the community and how to be part of the community, but also still report on the community. And that idea that you need to be part of it and also keep your distance from it. So there's a couple big themes going through the industry right now, and then what we're doing is we're looking for ways to help the industry understand those forces that are kind of sweeping through the industry. So we're doing research on how to package your products in terms of print and mobile and tablets, and what makes the most sense based on what the audience wants. We're looking at how to do more on smartphones, because more and more people have mobile devices, and they expect them to deliver the news when they want it, because it's in my pocket and I need it right now. I can't go home to get it, or I don't want to wait for the newspaper. Mm-hmm. So, and then we are also having fellows come in and explore new things that have to do with the credibility of news sites on the internet. Whether, we used to know that if you looked at the Columbia Tribune, that was a reliable source, still is, but there's other sources that are popping up that are not so bad, but it's very difficult to tell sort of, what the landscape is like. Mm-hmm. So we have a fellow that's going to look into that to try to help the citizens, better interface with all these new possibilities. And in terms of the smallest papers, we're about to launch a survey of a group called the Local Independent Online News Association, or LION, they call themselves. and it's
That could be unfortunate. We're not lying.
Lion, right? Okay.
Okay.
And they have have about 100 members from all across the country, and we're going to try to get a sense of how they're doing and what's going well for them and what's not doing so good, and try to help them get a better sense of how they can be sustainable.
A couple of things that you mentioned. The people wanting news now, they don't want to wait for the afternoon paper. I know that has affected us as well as newspapers everywhere that have websites. We're inching closer to a 24-hour news cycle. And although we don't yet do that, we update our breaking news and bulletins several times a day, starting early morning till late evening. How do you see that, Andy, evolving? I mean, I'll ask you about staff. How can we staff for a 24-hour news cycle?
Well, it's really tough. I mean, that's one of the biggest, changes. You were talking about what's different. Well, that's one of the big things that's different. Is there are a lot of, immediate. The immediacy is
Right.
so much more intense now than it ever was. And Randy and I kind of have our background in the wire service, and so we were kind of used to that. Always have been. I mean, there's a deadline every minute in the AP. That's what they say.
That's what they say.
And so I came into newspapers, and boy, it was great because you put out the paper today, and you got a whole another day before you got to put out another paper, and and that model, and then they gave it. There's a lot to be said for that model because they gave you a whole day to get the story right.
Yeah.
And by the time it was in the paper, you knew it was a good story and it was
Some
accurate.
depth and
Yeah.
accuracy.
And nowadays there is a demand among the audience for immediacy. So we do the best we can to, get the news out as it breaks and, as we can verify it. And that's the key thing for us is we're going to verify everything that gets out there under our name. And that's not the case with every, source of information. I don't even want to call them news media. A lot of people say they get their news from Twitter. Well, that's fine and good, but that's not journalism. It's raw, basic eyewitness accounts of incidents. Right. It's maybe reporting, but there's no journalism happening there. The journalism is the value that's added after you get the raw reporting done.
Well, plus when the studies go a little bit deeper, they find that the tweets and the Facebook posts are actually links to news articles produced
Exactly.
by journalists.
So I think that pendulum is swinging back. I mean, we've gotten kind of frothy about the fact that you can go on Twitter and see any breaking news you want before it's possible to report it in any other media out there. But now people are realizing the limitations of what you're getting. You're not getting verified. A lot of times you're not getting accurate information. Sometimes you are, but you don't know which is which.
Mm-hmm.
And
You don't get context. You don't get a lot of things.
yeah, so that's
You
the
get
value
140
that
characters.
you get 140 characters, and you get people trying to be fast and not necessarily trying to be right. And that's the value that newspapers and any other media that's takes journalism seriously can add to the process. And that's where we that's our franchise. That's what's going to keep us vital going into the future. I'm not worried about the future necessarily because I know that we're the only ones that are really doing that very well. And as long as we're doing that, and I know there's demand for it, we're going to remain vital.
And that being said, Twitter is a good tool for us because it allows us to get word out immediately and link back to our news stories on our website.
Right.
So it can be a force for good.
Yeah, sure it can.
Well, and I
Yeah.
think the challenges for the newsroom is to figure out the priorities and when to provide the information immediately and what information maybe doesn't need to, because you can't do everything all the time, 24 hours a day. But that's why it's so great to have a newspaper in your town, because you have people that every day come in and figure it out so that hopefully you know, the stories that are most urgent are going to get treated that way, and you have that capability as opposed to everybody trying to figure it out themselves.
And we do take advantage of those, tools. We know that people are out there looking for news on Twitter. We know that people are looking for our news on Twitter and Facebook, and all the rest of the social media. So our question is, how do we use the tools in a way that advances quality, as opposed to detracting from it.
And the key is that they're tools. They're not news in themselves.
Right.
They're a means to get to the story. So,
And tell the
Right.
story. I mean, that's sort of, we have all these new tools and new ways to engage with the community. And so, if we do a good job, then the information flows better, and there's more context, there's more impact, all kinds of good things can happen. If you ignore the tools, then that's a problem. But I don't think, most of the newsrooms around the country are trying to do the best they can and the most they can with them.
is it? And these days, the tools are so common and so easily used that even the smallest newsrooms, with a little effort, can learn to use them.
Right, because you download it on your phone, or you get an app, or. But an example, this is not a small newsroom, but I was at the Boston Globe, and there's a service called Vine, which is 6-second videos, and it just, it's kind of silly when you.
They run on a loop.
Yeah, they you make a video for 6 seconds and it plays, and then, it's a lot of fun and all that kind of stuff. And so you think, well, what's a newsroom going to do with that? Well, they have a LCD screen with 8 different vines that they can put up, and they have it geocoded for Boston, so they can watch all the vines that people in Boston are putting up. And they use it as a newsroom tool to get stories, because they'll see trends that, like, everybody's putting up vines about prom dresses and accessories. And so then the style editor, someone will go to the style editor and say, you should watch these, and then she'll be able to communicate with those people and maybe put them in a story about, this is the hottest new accessory because everybody's showing it off on Vine. Well, you couldn't do that before.
Sure.
No way. You'd have to call up high school kids. I mean, so that's the kind of thing that the smart people in newsrooms are saying, oh, I could make use of this and do a better job of what we're supposed to do.
And there's no ignoring it. I mean, it's certainly out there. A lot of people are using these services. It would be silly for us to, pretend like they don't exist, or that there's nothing valuable about them. They're incredibly valuable. And it brings information to people from people that never really had a chance to communicate with one another. So it's all a good thing. It's just there's so much noise that it's up to us to kind of cut through that.
I was interested. Randy also mentioned some of your fellows are looking at how do you connect with the community but keep it at arm's length, and that's something I think the Tribune has done exceptionally well. We are really involved in certain levels in the community. And Andy, you can address that a bit. I mean, you're on the board of United Way, for instance.
Well, that's right. I'm on several boards, and we have a lot of people in administrative roles and managerial roles at the Tribune that are involved in lots of community activities. I mean, that's one of the things that we value about our role in the community, is that we're a force for good. I mean, we're trying to improve things around here, and we want to, volunteer and give of our time. At the same time, we don't want to, compromise our editorial integrity and credibility by, promoting our pet causes. And, Jim, you're on the front lines of, making sure that standard is upheld. And, we do have, pretty strict requirements of our news staff that they can't be involved in certain issues. They can't, we tell them what is appropriate and what's not appropriate in terms of
Oh, and
sort of
it
thing.
doesn't happen by accident. It's a culture and a tradition that goes back generations at the Tribune, and I think that's, a lot of newspapers have that same tradition and culture, but some papers infamously don't. So
well,
I think that's that you live or die on your credibility, and you have to stay pure.
yeah,
So,
that's
People
right.
assume that we're not. I mean,
yeah, some people.
some people do.
Right.
Same with advertising. We have a very, um, strict separation of news and advertising. Not all papers do. Not all news organizations do.
Right.
We do, and we take that seriously, and it's served us well over the long run. And anybody who's been paying attention realizes that, we're not going to make our editorial decisions based on who's advertising or what causes we're involved in on the, administrative level.
You mentioned that most people still use print, read print. What is what's our audience like? I mean, are young people reading print?
We do have young readers. I mean, one thing that we know about our demographic mix is that it mirrors the community in a lot of ways. The same, very similar, makeup of the community is reflected in our readership. And at the same time, though, there are more online readers who are younger, and that's a trend that has cropped up in the past 5 years or so.
Does that concern you?
No, it excites me because these are folks that weren't really engaging in the print edition before. Our audience is bigger than it's ever been, and a lot of that has to do with our online readership.
Mm-hmm.
We, I think people are surprised to learn that we reach 80% of the market, either in print or online, and that's not counting anybody twice.
That would be the envy of any newspaper, I would think.
Yeah, it is, and it's the reality of a lot of newspapers. The newspapers are vital in their communities, and in smaller communities, that's even more so. We have, of our readership, about 60% of them are reading in print, which is surprising to a lot of people. So we're covering most of the community, but we're still reaching most of them with print. And then, we've got another 20% who read online only, and a lot of those are younger folks. And we're, bringing those people into news in a way that we never were before. So, that's a good thing in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Look into your crystal ball.
You're talking to Randy, right?
Yeah.
He's the one with
I'm
the
going to
grant.
ask each of you. Bill Gates said print's dead. And Ted Turner said print's dead. He was talking about the cable news networks, I think, back in the early 80s. There was just a news study out that said print will be dead in 5 years. How long will print be vibrant and vital and provide a business model that will be successful?
I mean, hard to predict, but I would say that we've got at least a generation of loyal, committed print readers. And these are folks who are my age and older. They're not all of a sudden going to stop reading the print edition. That's how they enjoy engaging in news, and they're very loyal. I have people approach me all the time, begging me to, keep putting out a print edition, and I tell them we have no intention of, ending it because there's too much demand for it. We'll give people news however they want it. It really makes no difference to me. If there were a great business model on the online side and that's how everybody wanted their news, and it turns out print was not very popular, then where do you think we'd put all our emphasis? But the fact is, most of us want to read us in print. That's where we make most of our money so that we can keep doing what we do.
Right.
And we're not about to stop doing that.
So Randy, I'll point that question at you, and you can give me your prediction for print, but also Andy just mentioned if there were a good business model for online, there will have to be a good business model for online at some point if print disappears. And that's your job.
Yeah, right. That's my job. So, well, I think print newspapers will be around for about 47 more years. No, I mean, I think print will be around for a long time but it's going to be different. And so you can already see changes in the newspaper. The size is changing, the content is changing, and that's really part of. There was a headline just the other day from a professor in London who said, "Spike the doom and gloom, journalism has a bright future." And his point was that journalism has always been reinventing, changing, and right now it might be a little messy for certain parts of the industry, but there's other parts that are flourishing, other parts that are brand new that are doing great. So print will change, it'll be different, but people want it, and like Andy said, I think the idea is that if people want a newspaper, then why shouldn't he supply them with a newspaper? And there's plenty of people that want a newspaper for the pleasure of reading a newspaper, but that same person may also want it on the smartphone when he's waiting in line at the football field, to read the news. You got to be there too. So as long as, people want the newspaper, it makes sense to print it. And I think that's just going to be the case for a long time.
So I guess in wrapping this up, that being a newspaper owner and being a newspaper journalist, it's more complex than it was 20 years ago or 15 years ago. You have to know a lot more platforms, a lot more ways to deliver your product, and I loathe calling it a product because I think a newspaper is more than that. But we're going to make it. We're going to be we're going to survive the internet age.
But yeah, I mean, it's been tough for everybody. Newspapers, television stations, radio stations, and there's not anybody that hasn't felt the economy for the past 5 years. And so a lot of papers that were not performing well financially to begin with have, had some well-publicized trouble because of that. But we're turning things. The economy's turning around, and we're coming out of that, and it's not a problem.
The other thing I'll say is that we have not helped ourselves by reporting all this bad news about how terrible things are and how,
Excellent point, and that's going to have to wait for another program because we're out of time.
All right.
I really appreciate you two. It's an interesting discussion, and I hope our viewers got a sense of what we're doing in the newspaper world. And keep reading, please. Good night. I'm Jim Robertson.